Good evening. Tonight we're looking at the crash between an American Airlines passenger plane and a military helicopter in Washington, D.C., in which it's now believed none of the 64 people aboard the American Airlines flight and 3 crew members survived. It's the deadliest aviation disaster in the US for over 20 years. In a moment, we'll look at what will happen now, but first, Obey Sharbanda brings us the very latest from Washington.
Tragedy on the Potomac River. President Trump has said that he has been fully briefed on the deadly plane crash at Washington's Ronald Reagan National Airport. In a social media post, President Trump said that the collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and an American Airlines plane should never have happened and could have been prevented, in his words. The president also asked why the airport control tower did not provide clear instructions to the helicopter pilots, knowing that the passenger jet was approaching one of the runways. Washington officials believe that there are no survivors of this deadly mid-air collision. The bodies of at least 28 victims have now been recovered from the crash site along the freezing waters of the Potomac River. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has told reporters that the flight patterns of both the American Airlines jet and the Black Hawk military aircraft that crashed on late Wednesday were not, quote, unusual. U.S. officials have now declared that there is a temporary pause on all helicopter flights for the U.S. Army unit that was involved in this collision. Passengers on the flight included a group of figure skaters, their coaches, and family members who were returning from national championship competitions. 3 soldiers were on board the helicopter. The Federal Aviation Administration has said that the mid-air crash occurred before 9 p.m. Eastern Local on Wednesday, when a regional jet had just departed from Wichita, Kansas, collided with the military helicopter on a training flight while on approach to an airport runway. All this occurred in some of the most tightly controlled and monitored airspace in the world, just over 3 miles south of the White House and the Capitol. This is the first passenger plane crash in the United States in nearly 16 years. Military helicopter flights are a normal occurrence in the airspace of the nation's capital, but there is usually close coordination with airport control towers that are meant to prevent mid-air collisions like this one from taking place. Many in Washington, including the president, are shocked that such a crash could happen here.
They shouldn't have been at the same height, because if it was at the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, it still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. It could have been 1,000 feet higher, it could have been 200 feet lower, but it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me, from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense, some really bad things happened, and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close. The preceding plane, but you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a confluence of bad decisions that were made, and you have people that lost their lives, violently lost their lives.
The National Transportation Safety Board has now launched a full investigation on how something like this could happen in one of the busiest airports in the country. I'm Guy Shone for A News, Washington.
Well, as rescue efforts give way to what's likely to be a long and detailed investigation, the focus is on the families of the 64 people on board the American Airlines flight and 3 crew members in the Black Hawk helicopter it collided with. What happens next is likely to be an established process involving multiple agencies and experts working together to switch from rescue to recovery. Emergency services, including police and medical teams, will ensure the crash site is secure and that non-specialists cannot access the area of the Potomac River where the aircraft came down. Even though officials have said they don't expect there to be any survivors, the search operation will continue to try and find any unrecovered bodies and people's belongings. The all-essential black boxes from both aircrafts are thought to have been found and may help to piece together a full picture of how this crash happened. The National Transportation Safety Board will also coordinate with the aviation safety bodies of the airline and military officials in the case of the Black Hawk helicopter. The attention will then switch to investigators who have the long and difficult task of recovering the wreckage from both the passenger airplane and the helicopter, ensuring that it is preserved and catalogued. Recordings from air traffic control will then be closely studied to work out if there were any miscommunications, misunderstandings, or errors in flight coordination. Witnesses, including people on the ground and people who might have captured images on mobile phones or CCTV, will also be involved to gather even more detailed insights. Detailed analysis of the incident will include studying the flight paths of both aircraft and reconstructing it in a virtual form. Now, this is done with radar data, flight data recorders, and other evidence to fully understand the flight path of the airplane and the helicopter. Knowing the sequence of events leading up to the crash is crucial. There's also the weather to consider. Investigators will examine the weather conditions at the time of the collision in case things like fog, rain, or visibility issues contributed to the collision. When equipment from the aircraft have been found, they'll also undergo detailed inspections to find out if they were structurally safe and no mechanical failure played a part in the accident. Well, at this point, nothing will be ruled in or ruled out. So investigators will also consider possible human factors, including pilot actions, training, fatigue, or simple errors of judgment. It's routine to ensure a safety procedure review is undertaken. This will look at airspace management of protocols for avoiding mid-air collisions, and will also assess whether all those procedures were followed or whether some were inadequate. Only after the long and detailed process is done will the investigating body, in this case the NTSB, prepare a final report detailing the cause or causes of the crash and any contributing factors. Now, that report is likely to include some safety recommendations, and these recommendations can lead to changes in regulations, air traffic control procedures, and airline operations. Now, it's early days yet, but in some cases the reports may lead to criminal investigations if there is suspicion of negligence, misconduct, or intentional wrongdoing. But for now, it's time to mourn and to think of the loved ones of those who lost their lives in this tragic crash. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of Newshour. Please do stay with us on A News for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, we wish you a pleasant evening ahead.